What makes a great king? I don't think Shakespeare really cared. I think what he knew about and cared about was what makes a great playwright. I'm Dr. Anna Kamaralli. Welcome to All Strut, No Fret, where we're going to use Henry V as our first case study to look into steps that you can follow in order to really get inside and understand Shakespeare.
We're starting with Henry V because it's the best play for helping us think like a playwright and get an idea of what Shakespeare was trying to do and how he felt he needed to go about it. But in order to do that, I'm not going to be giving you a breakdown of Henry V. Instead, I'm going to be introducing you to a process, a series of steps that you can take that mean when you open up a Shakespeare play, whichever one it is, you will know what you're looking at and what to do with it. To get there, eventually we'll be going through all 5 of these steps, but in this first video, we'll only be looking at the very first one, who is speaking to whom. The videos are going to come in little sets of 10 minutes per video, 3 for each play. So in the later Henry V videos, we'll look at steps 2 and 3. What are notes and why are they useful? And why should you care about the last word of each line? Those last 2 steps, 4 and 5, we won't even be looking at until we go on to the next play, which is going to be Romeo and Juliet. So don't worry if you don't know what scansion is at this point. Step 4, mark up the scansion, and step 5, the secrets of reading aloud, we'll be doing later. But right now, there could not be a better play to start with than Henry V if we're going to learn that process, because it's a play that tells us how to be an audience. Before we meet any of the major characters, it begins with a prologue, and the prologue tells us not only what to expect from the play, but what they, the actors, expect from us, how we need to engage with listening to them and participating in a collective imagination.
This chorus figure steps in and tells us that we're not going to see horses, we're not going to see battles, but we're going to hear about them, and it's up to us to hear properly and transform that in our minds with our imaginations into the vision of the events that happened in this play. I started off by telling you that this play is less about being a king than about being a playwright, but the truth is it's really about what they have in common, because kings and playwrights, especially in Shakespeare's time, would only survive if they were good at one thing. And that is this, rhetoric, the art of speech, speaking as an art form. And it's the basis of the whole of the Elizabethan education system. And it's the basis of what playwrights and kings used in order to have their hold and their power over their audiences. And actors too. Actors, like kings, had to have a command of rhetoric because that was their tool and their weapon to be persuasive enough to drag people along with them where they want them to go. Think of it as a competition to see who is the best talker, because how you persuade someone depends on who you're talking to and what you want them to do. Rhetoric was about doing the persuading through command of the art.
That is, the art that was involved in speaking a speech like this one. That's just one speech you're seeing on the page there, and you're going to find that over and over in this play in Henry V. Speeches of this magnitude that the actor playing Henry had to be capable of delivering persuasively, engagingly, dynamically. And I'm going to show you a few tools for how to pick apart what it is he's doing. And here are our tools. It's these 5 steps. Those are the questions that you are going to apply whenever you open up a page and see one of those lengthy and dense speeches. Once you've been through each of these questions, I promise you, you will go away feeling that you know what you're being told by that speech.
And it all starts with this. This is pretty straightforward, isn't it? You need to know who is speaking, but you also need to know who they're talking to. It's really going to help you if you know who is on stage at any given point. So check out the top of the scene, see who's there, because knowing who someone is talking to will tell you what they're trying to do.
Applying that first question to this particular play, though, actually does put you in an awkward situation because, unlike almost any other of Shakespeare's plays, this one has quite a bit of backstory because Henry V, the King, has a long history in theatre as Henry the Not King. There are two plays, Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2, in which Henry appears as a prince. And those two Henry IV plays, prequels, you might like to think of them, influence the shape of this third play, Henry V, because they tell us the story of Henry before he was king. Prince Hal, he was usually known as then, and he made a habit of surrounding himself by very dodgy company. And those guys turn up in Henry V, but by then Henry does not speak to them. They have a huge presence in this play, but Henry doesn't speak to them directly at any point because by then he has cast them off like last year's Capri Pants, and by the end of this play, every single one of them is dead.
The oddest thing about this play is that you need to know who this guy is. He doesn't even appear in Henry V, but he and Prince Hal had an intense relationship in the two Henry IV plays, and here in Henry V, the group of characters I just mentioned discuss his death, and he is a way to connect and anchor them to the story despite the fact that that their connection with Henry has been severed. So I told you that the first step was to know who is speaking to whom, and then I hit you with a bunch of people who Henry doesn't even speak to in this play. But it really does matter when you look at his speeches to see who he's talking to, because his persuasive rhetoric changes every time depending on who he's speaking to and what he needs to get out of them. It's his true genius.
To see how this works, let's look at the key moments throughout the play where Henry has to demonstrate his rhetorical skill in order to prove his command of his position. In Act 1, the biggest moment is when the French prince, the Dauphin, sends him a gift of tennis balls to make a mocking statement about his misspent youth, and Henry has to very publicly rebuke him in a way that shows his authority. In Act 2, his biggest speech is in some ways his most personal and moving because it's the incident where three English traitors to the crown and to their country are unmasked and have to be condemned. And Henry is forced to, once again, very publicly demonstrate that he is able to be commanding and incisive under stressful and emotionally turbulent circumstances. Act 3 is really the heart and core of the play, and in it we see several of Henry's largest, most famous speeches. Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. So rallying his troops, but then he has to switch gear almost immediately in order to persuade the governor of the defeated town to surrender, and later he has to once again keep rallying his troops in stressful circumstances. In Act 4, we actually get a speech where Henry tries to use his rhetorical talent to bargain with God, but after that we get his most famous speech of all, the St. Crispin's Day speech, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, where he has to persuade his troops to go into what seems like a hopeless situation and have the courage and the fortitude to fight together and to win. By Act 5, I think even Shakespeare must have realised that his lead actor would have to be completely exhausted because he gives him only one big scene, and it's the scene where he has to woo the French princess Catherine. It's been decided by treaty that they're going to marry, but he needs to persuade her that it's a good idea. And so you can see in each of these instances, Henry has to be persuasive, but always in a very individuated, specific way for the person he's talking to.
So to recap before we move on, I'm showing you some things you can do when you look at a play by Shakespeare for the first time to help you know what you're looking at and set you on your way to understanding it. And the first step we've looked at is being aware of who is in the room in each scene, who is talking, and just as important, who are they talking to? And that is why I've taken you through a series of examples from Henry V, looking at the way King Henry changes his way of speaking in response to whoever it is he's talking to and what he wants to get from them. In the next video, we'll get a bit more technical and we'll look at the notes, what they are and how they can help you, and also how smart it is to pay some real attention to the final word in every line of a speech. That's in Henry V, Part 2.